I've made my peace with God. I myself have made my peace with God. Have you ever heard anybody say that? I've heard a woman say it. I've had probably men and others. I made my peace with God. Like they had a struggle in life. They were struggling in a relationship or with God. And they said, but I've made my peace with God. And everybody drops it and says, well, that's cool, man. She's fine. She really achieved something in her life that everybody should achieve. She made peace with God. But my question then is it on your terms or his? That's the big question. On whose terms have you made peace? Because if you study peace and God's peace, it's a process with steps. In fact, one of the key words is reconciliation. Reconciliation. You know, the gospel says, so this is about peace. This isn't about the gospel. I'm just talking about character, right? Peace is in the Bible. It's out of the Bible. You know, before the Bible existed, there was peace. You know, so talking about eternal characteristics that are good, that we all can figure out whether we believe in God or not. So that's why this discussion is important. It's a very broad-based discussion, but in the gospel, the key word related to peace is reconciliation. In fact, it says that the gospel is the gospel of God's reconciliation. He's trying to reconcile the world to himself to have peace. Another word for peace is harmony, unity, agreement. And so, and in the gospel, it lays out the terms, the steps and the teachings and the doctrines and the covenant. The agreement, a covenant is agreement. The New Testament is a new covenant. The old covenant says there'll be a new covenant. It doesn't say testament. Testament's fine. I'm not saying that. But this prophecy is a new covenant, meaning an agreement, a reconciliation agreement, agreement of peace, a peace terms of peace. So my question to that woman, to the man, to myself is, on whose terms did I make peace with God? Was it his or mine? Because the gospel has the terms that are acceptable in God's eyes. We're the ones that offended him. He didn't offend us. If we really know him, he's not an offensive guy. He's not an offensive God. He has the perfect character. You'd want to be around him. And that's a subject for another short video. He's so good-natured, you want to be around him. If you really knew him, you would want to be around him. But there's one characteristic that's pretty scary that he has. And I can get into that in another video. But how did you make peace with God? Is it according to chapter and verse? Which is important because Jesus said, my words are going to judge you at the last day. He said, my words, the words of Christ, are very important. Most important. He said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. They're that important. They're eternal. They're not just a simple document that will go away. They are never going to go away. God will never allow it to go away, especially now. So how did you make peace with God? Do you just feel like you do? You just feel like, okay, I accept God. Well, what does God think about that? Have you ever looked at yourself through the lens of the gospel? I have. And I changed because I was wrong. I made my peace with God according to the terms in the gospel. I repented. I can tell you my sins. When I started reading Proverbs and Matthew, the first two books I read, basically, I realized I was guilty in my 20s. And then I knew in Matthew, Jesus was giving me a solution, very hard to accept because I sinned so much. I didn't know if I could be forgiven. But by my mid-20s, I accepted his forgiveness. I'm not saying that's a step. I'm just saying in my own words, go look at the book. If you say you made peace with God, you better study the gospel because that stuff is good. And it's the peace process in the terms of reconciliation God gave us through his son so that we could be at peace with him. I want you to be at peace with God on his terms, not yours.